to LinkedIn live streaming. Here we go. So I'm just pulling that up on my phone. And should be able to see comments and questions coming in on the live stream. This is awesome. Got a bunch of people coming in here. So if you're on LinkedIn, you haven't seen my live streams, I guess this will be your first one. So you'll get used to the format. I have a bunch of topics to go over, so I will jump on in. Yeah, I'll jump on in. All right, first topic, Instagram. So it's funny, my buddy Gabriel mentioned this like at the same day that I was thinking about Instagram's UX. And his tweet was, am I the only one that thinks that Instagram's UX sucks? And so I've been starting to use Instagram a little bit more. I'm super late to the Instagram game. And so I've been trying to get used to it. And I'm like, I find the UX confusing, and I'm thinking about it from like a UX perspective. And I'm also thinking about it just as a user. And it's funny because whenever you're talking about is UX good or bad, it's of course is subjective, but you can always objectively look if an app is as wildly successful as Instagram is. You have to objectively say that the UX is good to a certain extent, even if you feel confused by it or whatever. So as I'm using it, I'm thinking to myself like, well, I guess I'm just old. I guess I'm just old. That's why like I don't get this. And specifically one piece of functionality that I think is super interesting from a UX perspective is, and I'm going to pull this up on the screen, is the way they do carousels. So one of the main features of Instagram posts is you can post multiple images to a post, and then they give you these dots, and you can swipe through the carousel. And what's crazy about this is like, in terms of bad UX, like the carousel is like the canonical bad UX, right? It's something that as web designers we think is cool, but as users, it hides so much of the content. You got to swipe through it. It's generally better to just put the content right there on the screen so people don't miss it. A lot of times people don't know there's a carousel there, whatever. So whenever you look at like a talk or a blog post on what's bad UX, like carousel is like the number one thing. And yet it's one of the foremost features of Instagram. So clearly it's got to be working for them, right? And, they have a nice implementation of it where the dots are subtle, but they're also easily visible. So at the end of the day, it's kind of about execution, right? You could do a carousel 99 ways that are not good. You could do it one way that actually works. And I think you have to objectively say it's working, right, for Instagram, even though it's sort of bad UX as far as, what a lot of people would say. So anyways, that was it on that. Next up, this is a little bit more related to, see if I got chats coming in. Let me just do a quick test. All right, cool. Keep that open. All right, next up, the payment request API. Is something that ran across my radar recently. Actually, believe that Imagination Media was up for, was one of the finalists in the Magento Innovation Lab. And I believe also, yeah, here we go, will be available as part of the Magento course. So the work they did is being, shout out to Ali here on the slides, on the stage, is being merged into the Magento core. And here's a quick thing my buddy Peter Yap tweeted to me on how the payment request API works. And this is just awesome. Like from a user perspective, if I'm shopping on any site, I do not want to think about payment methods. I don't want to think about shipping. This is something I use on my Chipotle app, right? Now I don't know if it's the exact same API, but I use a Google payment method on there. You can do a Google Auth to authenticate them. Just click, 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 no manual inputs. Boom, you can pull in their payment methods. This is 100% the way to go. And this is awesome to see. I think this is going to become universal for independent e-commerce merchants, and is just super powerful. I don't know what else to say about that. I'm a little distracted by my LinkedIn live stream because it's my first day with it, and it's cool to have access to it. But yeah, that's pretty much it on that. Payment request API. All right, next up in the program is Stripe leaving San Francisco. So, tweet here from Roland Lee, second most valuable U.S. startup to leave San Francisco as city loses another headquarters. And so number of thoughts on this, right? Like, I believe in I don't remember exactly where the tweet was, but I believe, oh, here we go. Tweet from Austin Allred here, clarifying the reason for it. 1% tax on receipts. I believe it appears, what I'm assuming is that there's a 1% tax on receipts that the city of San Francisco is imposing. And so as a payments company, their business model is to charge essentially 3% of receipts. So that's a massive amount of money. It would be more reasonable to charge them on their profits or gross margin or something like that. So I'm assuming that's something the city of San Francisco is imposing. So, the broader, and I talked, I think yesterday or the day before, about the California proposed bill related to freelancing. And so, regulation, taxing tends to hurt business. I mean, this is something most people are aware of. And obviously there's different sides of the debate. But Stripe is such an amazing company. I mean, as much as people tend to, as much as a lot of the big tech companies, the social media platforms sort of get a lot of, hatred and criticism, like Stripe is there's hardly anything to criticize, right? They're not, monetizing people's attention in weird ways. They have they charge you to sell stuff, to make money. And, anyway, but one thing that, as I looked at this article, like they're moving 10 miles south to South San Francisco. Like, at first I was like, oh gosh, are they going to move to Austin? Please don't move to Austin. As much as I love Stripe, I want the explosion of people moving to Austin to slow down now that I'm here. But anyways, I was like, where are they moving? I was like, oh, they're moving 10 miles south. So they're like, on the one hand, it makes this article a little like they're not leaving San Francisco, they're moving to South San Francisco. But I assume they're moving outside of San Francisco proper. And so that in of itself is interesting. It's regulation, right? Like, regulation and taxation has unintended consequences. And so I guess they're not moving very far, which is interesting. I'm assuming they're moving to another taxing jurisdiction to avoid the taxes, but that's super interesting. All right, next up in the program, tweet from Jason Fried. Out of the current 56 people who work at Basecamp, 33 have been with us for 5+ years. Of those 33, 25 have been with us for 7+ years. And 10 have been with us for 10+ years. So, a lot of things to talk about here. Just the numbers these numbers for tech are just out of control. And without doing a rigorous review of tech tenures, diving into the data, I'd be willing to bet that this is the highest average, tenure or median tenure of any tech company in the US. I'd imagine it's got to be up there. Like, people move jobs every 2 years, every 3 years. I see that a lot. And this is just incredibly unique. I love everything about how they do business. I mean, I'm just this huge fan of Jason Fried, and on so many levels. I've read a couple of their books, and it's just awesome to see. So as a couple of interesting bits here related to pay that they get into in the Twitter thread here. Somebody asked, how to use financial incentives for recruiting and retention. And he said, we don't offer equity or bonuses, linked to an article on how they pay people. And they have it's funny that I'm surprised I hadn't seen this before, or maybe I did see it and I didn't remember it, because I do keep a pretty close eye on their stuff they put out. But they have a pretty unique model for how they pay people. They do not negotiate salaries or raises. Everyone in the same role at the same level is paid the same. So they have people go from junior programmer to senior programmer to lead programmer to principal programmer, and then the same levels for designers, customer support, and ops. And so I think that's really cool. Like, it's weird because on the one hand, I'm a big fan of negotiating your salary. I've talked about that before because it's a necessary evil. I mean, I guess you could say it's a necessary evil in 99.9% of the world. However, when companies are set up in this way, I think it's sort of more fair overall, particularly when the actual rates they pay are competitive, which is what he gets into next. Raises happen automatically once per year when we review market rates. Our target is to pay everyone at the company in the 90th percentile or the top 10% of the San Francisco market rates. Interesting, this San Francisco theme is coming up multiple times here in the stream. But yeah, so this is and I don't know offhand. I know the San Francisco market is insanely high. I wonder if I can quickly Google this. 90th percentile San Francisco salary. There's got to be a relatively quick way to pull this up from some of the salary websites. Yeah, I don't know. 109. So whatever that number is, and it should be pretty easy to reverse engineer that. That is a high number. I have had people in the Bay Area trying to hire developers for $175,000 who couldn't find anybody. And I'm talking about people that could get a great job, a remote job for $100,000, $120,000. So those are high numbers. And that's awesome that they can afford to do that. And then they also talk about, I can't remember if they talk about stock options. They talk about, because, they don't give stock options because they never intend to sell the company, which is another thing I love about Basecamp. It's that they do things completely differently from sort of the standard Silicon Valley model of let's go fast and sell. Like, it's like they're all about sustainability, sustainable growth, healthy growth. And I just love it. And it, I think they don't do any profit. All right. Do they do a profit share? I think they said they've recently put a profit growth sharing scheme in place. So that's interesting, but he did say no equity or bonuses. But anyway, like, I just think it's interesting. Like like you might think like, wow, you have such a high tenure, you must be incentivizing with a lot of equity. And I think that what their model just goes to show, like, if you pay people a fair rate with no BS, no nonsense, without them having to hassle with negotiating, and just give them work to do that they love, you sort of can't beat that, which is just so cool, man. I freaking love Basecamp, and I love Jason Fried. And anyway, that's it. I think a lot of interesting nuggets in there on the topic of compensation for companies to be thinking about. Hey, I got my first comment in here. Kerry Kaufman, good morning. Hey, thanks. Good morning to you too. Feel free to post any questions in the LinkedIn live chat or questions, comments, good mornings, or pretty much anything. All right, next up, John Hughes tweeted something. First of all, it was a response to something from Tom Robertshaw, a poll that was posted up here. Your thoughts on Magento's speed of updates and improvements, which is an important question. Actually, there was a number of interesting replies, one of which I remember was Aaron Sheehan. And his answer was, depends on if you mean Adobe developed features or Magento community engineering fixes. EngCom has been on fire, and they ship a truly stupendous amount of code regularly. Feature development has been pretty slow to materialize to the point that I've stopped reading roadmap slides at events, which is really funny. And I have to say, I totally agree with Aaron. Like, whatever the EngCom, whatever community engineering is smoking is working, right? Whatever it is they're doing in terms of how they're structured and whatever, it's working, right? Whereas like the sort of corporate side of things is moving slowly, right? And so then circling back to the reply from John, this is something that I have sort of thought about and said, I think, like, John's comment is drop it all and get full API coverage finished. Everything else can wait. I cannot say how strongly I agree with this. Like, I mean, when we're talking about PWA, there's so many community initiatives with fantastic front end work. The only, dependency is to have a fully, if the Magento API layer is solid and more feature complete than the other e-commerce platform alternatives, that is what will drive the PWA frameworks to, build integrations. That is what will drive adoption. And I think that is critical. It's more in line with Magento's core capability, which is right building out the backend functionality of the API. Front end capability is a whole other capability. I talked recently about BigCommerce's partnership with Deity. It's interesting to note that BigCommerce is not building their own. As far as I understand, I haven't researched this all too thoroughly, but they're not building their own sort of native PWA solution, as much as it might make sense to do so. They're leveraging a third-party thing and just letting them hit that API, right? Like I think e-commerce platforms should focus first and foremost on their APIs, because that's going to enable so many other things. That's going to enable the community to go nuts on so many different directions. Order management to PWAs to literally everything else can wait. So I just agree with John so much on this. I think it was a great point. It'd be interesting to see where that goes. All right, got a couple comments rolling in here. Mehdi, bonjour. My wife is a big fan of French, by the way. Damien agreed. Yeah. Shout out to Damien, by the way, Retzinger, who's also building another great example of somebody building a front end, I believe a PWA. Correct me, Damien, here. It's your thing is, I want to say Angular front end. If you want to link that up to me, I'll pull it up real quick. But yeah. So next up, $5 million fund for WordPress businesses. Pull this up here real quick. Okay, so tweet from Corey Miller. A $5 million fund for acquiring WordPress businesses. My interview with Mike Demo. Is that his real name? Twitter username MP Mike of Web Ventures. And then there's more details in here. I really didn't look at this article too closely, other than just that there's a $5 million fund for investing in WordPress businesses. I guess it's Web Ventures. $5 million fund for acquiring, investing in WordPress businesses. And I don't even know exactly what is meant by WordPress businesses, whether these are WordPress plugins or other things. I did just get a reply from Damien on the previous topic, so I want to pop that in. The lag here is a little tricky. Oliver, when you're cutting this video up, you can cut this part out because this is relevant to the last topic. But Damien's project is Daffodil from Greycore, so you can check that out. It's another front end PWA thing. Okay, back to the WordPress thing. So WordPress business. Yeah, so I don't know if this is, again, WordPress plugins specifically or businesses building on WordPress, but the point is, I think this is really smart. I think this is awesome. And I'm like, how in the world does this not exist for Magento, right? A lot of money in the Magento ecosystem, a lot of opportunity for innovation. I talked about the Innovation Lab earlier on the stream, and that's obviously that's a great initiative to drive innovation. But how about an actual fund, right? Like let's put some money where our collective mouths are. And anyway, so I think that'd be cool. And then I got a little Guido replied to me, and then I got a little excited, and I posted a follow-up tweet where I said, "Hey Magento, if you commit $1 million, I can probably raise another 4 million. We could do this." And then afterwards, I was like, "Man, I don't know. I might have signed up to bite off more than I can chew, because that's probably a lot of work to manage all that." But if nothing else, I think that I'd love to spread the word about that type of thing and chime in on which initiatives I thought were worth funding. But there's so much money in our ecosystem. Like, how can there not be a fund for this? You know, like Adobe has super deep pockets. Obviously, Adobe's investing, and there's a lot of investment into the ecosystem. I mean, I talked about community engineering earlier. That's a massive investment into the ecosystem. But I'd love to see a fund for, basically extensions to be developed on top of Magento. And I think that there's already a lot of stuff happening, but you could, I think, hit the gas pedal on that by putting together a fund. Comment from Carrie. So I walked away from WordPress and didn't look back, so I haven't paid much attention since. Is WordPress still a hot ticket item? So great question. So I am actually not too closely dialed into the WordPress ecosystem, but I do remember hearing recently that what's the company? Automatic, the sort of commercial arm of WordPress, was valued at $1 billion or acquired, or what happened there? Something happened with Automatic was so I'm not too educated on this topic. A lot of us in the Magento community like to sort of poke fun at WordPress, and it's not very the code base is not very object oriented. There's lots of so there's issues there and whatnot. And I'm not too dialed in. I know people that are really connected into the WordPress community. But yeah, I mean, I think that, this in and of itself is an interesting indicator of the fact that there's a lot of opportunity here. And I think one thing actually that he said specifically, this is an example of how hot the WordPress ecosystem is for investment, the fact that there's a fund there. So I think that is, I think that's interesting. All right. Last up is this new product I ran into called Mesa, which my buddy Aaron Wadler over at ShopPad mentioned to me. I've been looking at automation stuff lately. I've been looking at Zapier, Integromat, Airtable. I've been looking at a lot of no-code tools, and he mentioned that they built this. It's sort of like a Zapier type of thing for integration with Shopify, specifically optimized for Shopify Plus. and optimized for high volume merchants on Shopify Plus. Utilizes Plus only APIs. So Shopify Plus is seeing tremendous growth right now. I know tons of solutions partners that have dipped into the Shopify Plus world. And one of the limitations you do here is that, well, Magento is more powerful in terms of if you need to do customizations, if you need to do complicated integrations. And so this is, I think, fills that gap in the Shopify space because it gives you more ability to, do complex integrations, workflows, that kind of a thing with things like Salesforce, SAP, right? These are all enterprise grade, tools, ERPs, things like that. And so it looks like Mesa's approach is not so much no code. My understanding is that everything is sort of code driven. Maybe this is like a low code. Maybe you could classify this as low code and I'm going to jump into some templates a little bit sooner. A little critique on the website here. These screenshots could be a little bit easier to see. Great monitoring functionality, edit and replay, right? These are the types of things you got to have when you're building these types of integration frameworks, tools. Built for developers, so leverages V8 JavaScript, world's widely used coding language. So I'm guessing it's probably powered by Lambda on the back end, I'd imagine. Not entirely sure though. So you really start to get the idea for what's going on when you look at the templates. So automation templates. And so lots of examples here. So for example, add image colors to products as tag. I don't totally understand that. Send file to Google Cloud Print. I'm assuming this would be like if you do like a web to print. No, I don't completely understand that one either. Here we go. This one makes sense. Send an order from Shopify Flow to Block Core Cognito verification, which I'm assuming is like some kind of a fraud detection thing. The interesting thing about mentioning Shopify Flow is that Shopify Flow is essential, which is super interesting. I remember seeing that a little while back, and it's sort of like, in and of itself, it's sort of like a Zapier for Shopify. It's sort of a flexible automation platform. But the fact that they're building this makes me think that, oh, and by the way, look at that, 3.9 stars, 13 reviews. That's interesting. I don't understand what the deal is with Shopify Flow, and I'm not super deep in the Shopify ecosystem, so I'm trying to grok it more, but I don't understand why this isn't more widely used. There's got to be issues with it. But the fact that this exists makes me think that this functionality is not possible to build in Shopify Flow itself. So anyways, I'm assuming that this is identity verification, right? So you want to do, this is a fraud prevention identity verification thing. So anyways, lots of different examples here that sort of show you, although one critique I'll make on this website, I almost want to see categories. I do see categories here, but I almost want these blocks to be categories because these are all sort of very similar as I'm trying to sort of wrap my head around what this is for. These are all sort of similar. I'd rather see sort of higher level categories. Send a Salesforce lead to Shopify customer, right? So you kind of get the idea. And I can just imagine, as with Zapier, they build out more and more of these integrations and templates such that anything you need to do, you can just repurpose an existing template to build out automation. So I think that's super interesting. Look, I just talked about in a previous segment, let's do a $5 million fund in the Magento ecosystem. I'd love to see something like this. I'd love to see this type of automation for Magento, right? I mean, this is super cool. So yeah, I did have a couple comments come in from Carrie, exactly, right? Damien, you could start with GitHub sponsorship for extension devs and do 2.5 million and let Microsoft match the other 2.5 million. Yeah, brilliant. I mean, again, going back to the topic of the idea of a fund, that's a great idea. I love the idea of GitHub getting involved. question from Mehdi, is it like if this and that? Yeah. So if this then that is an automation platform like Zapier and Integromat. But for, yeah, exactly. It's like if this and that, but for e-commerce. And specifically, it's sort of more code driven. So if this, then that, Zapier, all those automation frameworks are all about you don't have to use any code. But I think Mesa's approach is you can, everything is code driven. So there's a lot of flexibility in what you need to build. But I assume if you need to use an existing template that's already been coded, you can use that, I assume, without writing any code because it's already written. So really interesting approach there. That is all I have for you today. Thanks so much for tuning in. This was super exciting to do my first LinkedIn live stream. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of your Thursday.